So this training today is going to be short and sweet. Okay, not a whole lot of information, but I think it's a great topic to kind of engage with a little bit because there's a lot of stuff that you all deal with that you might not even realize is impacting you as much as it is. Okay, so today's going to be just kind of validation for you, maybe a little bit of information, something that maybe you didn't know about, but also just kind of a way for us as a community to come together and be like, yes, somebody gets it, right? It's not just me, right? And I try to give you all topics that are useful to you and practical, but I think this one specifically is going to be useful in a way that it kind of maybe combats some of that guilt or that self-imposed shame that seems to be very prevalent through caregivers as I've conversed with you over the years, okay? Right, so if you have any questions or comments as I go through this information, please feel free to add it into the chat box. These trainings are all recorded and they are put on our website and our YouTube channel. And if you want to go back through it or you want to share it or you have to leave and you can't participate the entire time, check our website, usually Monday or Tuesday of next week, and they'll be up there for you. And let's see, one more thing I was going to say. It'll come back to me. I don't need to say it now. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the information. Okay, so we're going to talk today about something many of you experience, but maybe you don't always have the language for it. So we're talking about decision fatigue and cognitive load. So this is kind of like burnout, but not in like a dramatic sense, what we think about classic burnout, right? This isn't about emotional collapse or anything. This is really just going to talk about that kind of steady and grinding exhaustion that comes from having to think about everything all the time. Okay. So maybe this sounds familiar. You are tired, but you feel like you haven't done anything all day, right? Or you can't even decide what to make for dinner anymore. Like your brain is just actively revolting against you. Or maybe you feel like your brain is just very, very full. Okay. This is what we're talking about today, that decision fatigue and cognitive load. Okay. So oftentimes you all are just told to manage your time better, right? Be more effective at prioritizing, practice more self-care. And those are all very good suggestions, right? We don't want to deny the value of those things, but they definitely miss something very important. Most of you aren't exhausted because you're doing a lot physically, right? And many of you are, right? Many of you are lifting and shifting and doing a lot of physical labor, right? But not everyone. And that's not where all of your exhaustion comes from, right? You're exhausted because your brain never gets to rest, okay? Your brain is tired because you are having to be essentially the brain for another person, right? You're having to make all these decisions for them, for their well-being. You always have to be thinking of another person right alongside with what you're doing, right? With thinking of yourself, right? So caregiving creates this constant mental workload that doesn't clock out, right? You don't hit, well, it's 5 o'clock, I'm done, right? That's not the way it works, right? Even when you're sitting down, even when you're asleep, your brain is still forecasting into the future, right? And that's not uncommon for humans in general, right? Most of us spend a lot of our thinking time either in the past or in the future, right? We're very, very rarely in the present moment. But as caregivers, we have to kind of cast our net very widely and plan for the things that we know are going to show up and also make sure there's a little wiggle room for the things that we don't know are going to show up because they inevitably always do, right? And so if you don't understand that, it's very easy to blame yourself for symptoms that are actually neurological. And we'll get into that a little bit, okay? So yes, managing your time is helpful. Getting your priorities in order is essential. Practicing self-care is a must, but that is not the cure for an overworked brain, a neurological fatigue, right? Working in relationship with each other can help kind of offset that load, but that's not the only thing, right? So constant decision making, okay? Let's start with that. You're making decisions constantly, right? Some of those are big, like medical choices, right? Especially if you are, doing like end of life advocacy, if you are having to be, the power of attorney, medical attorney, things like that, and making all these decisions about your loved one's care. Those are big decisions, right? Safety decisions, right? Do we put security cameras in the home? Do we get, maybe some aids for like walking? Do we, if mom or dad has, dementia and they're starting to wander, do we put locks on all the doors, right? There's a lot of safety decisions that come into play, right? And then also long-term planning, right? I know I've been on several calls with those of you who are caring for loved ones, and they didn't do anything to plan for the end of their lives. And so now you have to kind of retroactively go back and figure out, what is it that they want? And they might not be able to communicate that to you. So you kind of have to just guess, right? And that's a lot to try to sort through, right? And still provide the dignity and the care for your loved one and respect their wishes, right? And then there are some small ones, and these are the ones that kind of chip away at our energy and that kind of that underlying cause of that constant fatigue we feeling, right? So some of those small decisions could be, do I step in now or do I wait? Right? Is the timing right for these things? Is it a bad day or a good day? Right? Can this wait until tomorrow? What needs attention first? Right? These are micro decisions that happen all day long. And so the problem isn't really just making one single decision, right? The problem is the volume of decisions every day that you have to make, okay? Especially if you're like a parent, right? Parenting is, you know, tried and true for these little decisions and all this cognitive load, right? But then you add on a diagnosis, right? And things get a little bit more tricky, right? They get a bit more saturated. So the brain is not designed to make hundreds of decisions every day without relief. That's just not how we're wired, okay? Our biology has not caught up to our culture in a lot of ways, okay? So that fatigue is not a sign of you specifically having some sort of, lacking capacity or weakness. You're a human being in a world that requires a lot of cognitive energy, okay? And caregiving doesn't just require making these decisions, right? It requires making them with incomplete information. Some of you are, most of us are not medical professionals or therapists or, things like that. And so we have to kind of learn as we go. And that is incredibly taxing on our brain. A lot of your decisions are under time pressure, right? We have to make this decision now. We don't have a lot of time to think, right? Spur of the moment, quick decisions. You're emotionally invested, right? And if you think about, again, if you're caring for a child, how was what I do today going to impact them long term and set them up for success and independence, right? In a world that maybe isn't built for them. So how do I equip them for that, right? That's emotionally taxing. And you're invested in their well-being, obviously, right? And then you think too, if you're caring for an aging parent or a spouse, you're emotionally invested in that person and you want to make sure that you are respecting their wishes and you're giving them that dignity and respect that they want, even if there's a role reversal. And so that can be very taxing as well, right? Because then you have to navigate not only the decisions you're making, but the nuances of that relationship and potentially the new role of that relationship. And that can be very difficult. And we're also making these decisions maybe without clear feedback. Am I doing this right? Is there a better way? Right? And so not only are you making these decisions, you're second guessing them at the same time. Right? And this combination is incredibly taxing. And these tiny decisions, hundreds of decisions every day, all day, that's what's creating that mental fatigue. Okay? That decision fatigue. I'll tell you a little story. I was going through my master's program and working full time and homeschooling 5 children who have ADHD. And I remember I was telling my husband, I was like, I'm so tired. Can you take over dinner tonight? And my husband's usually really good about that, even without asking. But this time he goes, yeah, of course, honey. What do you want me to make? And I swear to goodness, I almost knocked his block off. I don't care if it's a bag of potato chips. I just don't want to make that choice, right? And it seems silly to not, to be frustrated that he asked for my opinion. But it's because I was so tired of making decisions, I couldn't, right? I could barely decide what I wanted to wear that day because I'd been doing it for so long without a break. My brain is just kind of like, if you're lifting weights and then you get to that point where you're maxed out and your muscles just fail on you, that's kind of how my brain felt, right? It was so full. I couldn't make one more decision. And the fact that he suggested I make a decision, I mean, I wasn't very nice. I know, shocker, right? So cognitive load is the mental work of holding information in your mind, tracking details, anticipating needs, remembering what other people forget, and switching tasks frequently. Okay? And this is all invisible work. So let's break it down a little bit. Holding information in your mind, doctor's appointments, medication schedules, social time, schoolwork if your kids are in school, right? Well, I know when mom took this pill at this time of day, it, made her symptoms worse by bedtime, right? So knowing all the different reactions, right? Holding all of that in your mind. Tracking details and anticipating needs, right? A lot of you are caring for people who are not communicating with you, right? They've lost the ability or they've never had the ability. And so you almost have to be an expert in reading their nonverbal cues, right? So you're tracking all of this. You're anticipating. Well, I know if, mom doesn't have lunch by 2, she's usually, lethargic or whatever, right? So you're kind of always having to think ahead and you're rearranging your schedule based on the needs of another person, right? Remembering what other people forgot. This is a big one, I think, right? Especially if you're the brain of the household. And then someone says, what's our kid's birthday again? Ooh, right? If you don't put a note in your phone, right? And it's that outsource of that cognitive capacity, right? I don't have to remember it because I know this person will always remember it, right? Caregivers don't get that luxury. We don't get the luxury of not remembering. We have to remember, right? And then switching tasks frequently. Tell me if this sounds familiar. You're in the zone, right? You're getting stuff done. You're maybe, working on bills or meal planning or doing stuff with your schedule. And then here comes a need. And so then you got to stop abruptly what you're doing, switch focus, handle this, and then navigate your way back. Okay? It sounds simple, but if you're doing it over and over and over again with a fatigued mind, that costs you something, right? Shifting our attention, recalibrating to that scenario, and then shifting again, that wears down a mind very, very quickly. But a lot of us don't realize that that's what's happening, right? So then we get the brain fog, or we forget a bill, or we miss pills, or we do something, we make some sort of mistake and we beat ourselves up over it. Oh, so stupid. When didn't I remember that? Right? It's because you're tired. Your brain is tired. So it's going to start dumping things overboard that it doesn't feel are necessary, right? Like your doctor's appointments, switching the laundry over, taking the chicken out the freezer, right? It happens all the time. So day to day, what does cognitive load look like? Okay. Tracking, anticipating, remembering, coordinating, right? It's a very, very intense mental dance that we do every day. Okay. So if you're the caregiver in your home, even if you have people in your home who are willing and able to assist you, they are typically not self-starters. Okay. And not to dig on anybody who is your partner in this. Okay. But studies show the reality is there's usually one person responsible for delegating. Okay. So you are the memory system, right? Oh, go ask mom. She remembers it. I don't have to remember because mom's got it, right? You're the coordination hub, okay? You have to keep track of everyone's schedules and the logistics of those schedules, right? A contingency planner. What happens if A doesn't fall through? What's our plan B? Everyone else is looking at you, right? And the emotional regulator, right? Especially for those of you who are caring for little ones who are neurodiverse, right? And they don't have that capacity yet to regulate themselves. So that's your job, right? So you have to stay regulated to regulate someone else. Whoo, that's a lot. That's a lot to carry. And we don't give ourselves that grace because we think, well, that's just what the job is. That's what we do, right? Yes. But being aware of the price and the toll it takes on your brain, that's where we start to cultivate that self-compassion practice, right? Because it's no longer, well, what's wrong with me? I messed up. I'm tired. I need a break. I deserve it. I need it, right? And you don't feel so bad for shutting down a little bit to kind of let your brain grow back, okay? And this mental labor continues even when your body rests. How many times have you said, I'm going to take a rest day, and you sit and you don't do a lot of tasks, but you're taking that and you're still thinking, okay, well, Friday I've got this appointment at 9 a.m. and I got to make sure I get to the grocery store and the kids got it this and the that, right? You're sitting still, but your brain's going a mile a minute. And then if those of you who maybe are experiencing anxiety on top of it, it's going to make those wheels spin even faster, right? And more chaotic. That's tiring. Our brain is an organ, okay? It's not this mystical thing that has finite power. It's an organ that gets tired the more we use it, okay? And as caregivers, you are using it 24/7. A lot of you aren't sleeping because your mind wakes you up, right? I can fall asleep, I can't stay asleep. If I get up to go pee, I'm up for 4 hours because as soon as my feet hit the floor, I'm thinking about groceries, right? I'm thinking about logistics. It happens. It's common. It's not a you problem, okay? This is a human experience, okay? Decision fatigue. We talked about this a little bit, okay? But how does it show up in the brain? How does it show up in our behavior? Very general overview here, but it might be helpful to you. So when your cognitive load stays high, right? When you're constantly activated in your brain meat, okay? Your attention narrows. Emotional regulation becomes more difficult. Simple choices can feel very overwhelming, right? And your patience decreases, okay? This is a predictable brain response, not a personal failure. I want you to really get that today, okay? Caregivers, in my experience, are some of the most compassionate and thoughtful people on the planet to everyone else. And you are so mean to yourself, okay? I should have done better. Why did I forget that? I'm so stupid. Blah, 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 right? Let's give ourselves some grace. Our brains are doing what brains do. It's not a personal thing. It's a human thing, okay? And when cognitive load stays high for long periods of time, the brain adapts, right? But not always in ways that feel good, okay? Brain fog, right? I can't think about this the way I want to. My brain won't let me. It's tired. Irritability, right? When we're overwhelmed, when we're overburdened, when we've got a lot on our plate, and there's no resources available, we require space, right? And sometimes the way we get that space is by being irritable and saying to basically to everyone, stay away from me, right? I can't handle one more thing. Emotional flatness, okay? So maybe, that could look like, say your kiddo shows you something they're really excited about. And instead of you getting excited with them, you're just kind of like, that's nice. Good job, right? Because your well is dry. and your brain is making concessions in a way, right? So your brain is trying to prioritize with the limited resources it has. And so emotional, expression doesn't seem to be a priority, right? Reduced patience and difficulty with simple choices, okay? So you may notice when you are in this space, you're maybe snapping over small things, right? Trying to walk out the door and your purse catches the doorknob and you just want to rip it off the hinges, right? Maybe you start avoiding decisions altogether like I did, right? Figure it out yourself. I'm done, tapped out, right? Maybe you're starting to feel overwhelmed with very basic tasks, right? I have to shower again, right? Maybe you start to withdraw socially because engaging with other people and holding your attention long enough for a conversation just does not seem feasible to you anymore, right? And this is where the symptoms start creeping into that burnout space, right? But here's a very critical piece that I want to reiterate once again. Many caregivers interpret these changes as a personal failure, okay? I should be able to handle this. I used to be better at this. What's wrong with me, right? Nothing. Nothing's wrong with you, right? This is just what happens when a human brain is asked to stay in problem-solving mode without relief, adequate relief, right? It's neurological, not moral, not a character flaw, not you being lazy or being mean. Your brain's tired. And these are the symptoms that you need rest. Restorative rest, right? Not just sitting on the couch on your phone, still doing tasks, right? Do something that brings life into your mind that's fun, right? So things like art, listening to music, watching a television show that doesn't require a lot of thought, right? I'm a big fan of Nailed It on Netflix. That show's hilarious, but that's just me. But these are the things that we neglect, right? I don't have time for that. I would argue you don't have time to ignore it, right? Because if your brain is not working at its full capacity, what is the cost there really, right? And over time, not only does it impact, your mental capacity, but it elevates your cortisol levels, right? The stress hormone. It can elevate your blood pressure, right? Lack of sleep can create all sorts of problems. And so then we start to notice how when we don't adequately maintain the brain, the whole system is in jeopardy, right? So again, I would argue you don't have time to not take that time, right? So systems offload work, okay? A lot of our systems offload cognitive labor onto you, the caregiver, okay? So this is very important to name this layer. Systems like healthcare, education, social services, a lot of these function by offloading that cognitive labor onto you as the caregiver, okay? So you're expected to coordinate between providers, right? How many of you have multiple doctors and specialists that your loved one is having to see? And they're all telling you something different, right? So you have to be the one to coordinate all of that amongst providers because they're not communicating with each other. That's cognitive load. That's you thinking about something that you really probably should have them doing, right? Tracking that information across the systems, right? Noticing problems early, right? Which again, that requires you to do a little research on your own, right? And then fill in the gaps when things fall apart. Well, I know your loved one is struggling now, but we can't get them in for 6 months. So what do you do in that space between, right? White knuckle through it, basically. And this work is rarely acknowledged and almost never compensated. Okay, if you guys do a little Google search, and I would encourage all of you to do so, it might make you a little salty, but it might be worth your while, and see how many millions and billions of dollars of care and work you all provide unpaid to the system as a whole. It's a lot, okay? And so you end up being a buffer between these rigid systems and human needs, okay? And that exhaustion that results in that isn't because you're disorganized or because you're weak. It's because the structures rely on you carrying more than one person's share of that cognitive work, okay? A lot of these systems operate with the expectation that you're going to do most of it, okay? So how do we reduce cognitive load? Okay, we can't change everything overnight. And there's a lot of things that we really do not have power or control over, unfortunately. But there are some things that you can do that over time can reduce your cognitive load. Okay, so these are strategies that aren't going to ask you to do more, but help reduce that mental load. Okay, externalize decisions whenever possible. What does this mean? Write things down. Use lists, visual cues, anything that moves information out of your head reduces strain, right? If you write it down, you don't have to remember it. Okay. You give it somewhere else to live. Reduce decision points, okay, with defaults and routines. So defaults are your friend, right? So routine meals, right? Taco Tuesday, right? Set schedules. Repeated systems reduce daily choice fatigue. I don't have to choose what we're having for dinner every night because I meal planned on Saturday, right? So now I know every day what I'm going to do for dinner. So that's one less decision I have to make each day, okay? It sounds like a drop in the bucket, and it is, but every drop counts, right? Every bucket is full of millions of drops, right? So a few drops here and there can actually do you some good. Naming invisible labor, okay? Even if it's just to yourself, okay? I'm not saying you have to jump on the roof with a megaphone and say, my brain's tired, okay? I mean, you absolutely do that, take a picture, I'd love to see it. But you can just say to yourself, I'm tired because I've been tracking a lot. This reduces shame, okay? Shame, I think, is humanity's greatest enemy. So anytime we can snipe it, I think we should take advantage of that, right? Because if you acknowledge that you're tired because your brain is busy, then you're not going to feel like you have to earn a break, okay? We don't earn rest, okay? Rest is where we should be guilt-free, right? We all require rest. And protecting true cognitive rest, okay? So this is not the same as physical rest, right? Like I said before, a lot of us are physically resting, but we're not mentally resting. We're still problem solving and planning, okay? So if you say, well, I'm gonna take a day off, but your mind is working overtime, that is not cognitive rest, and it's not gonna reduce that load for you, okay? So be mindful. What can I do to actually rest my brain where I don't have to think? That's why a lot of people have like comfort shows, right? Shows maybe they've seen a million times. They know what's going to happen. They know how it's going to end up, but they can just enjoy watching it because they don't have to think about it, right? They just kind of zone out a little bit. So notice when fatigue is information, okay? Our bodies are always talking to us. The trick is most of us don't know how to translate the language, okay? So sometimes our exhaustion is a signal that our load needs to change, right? Not that we need to push harder, okay? A lot of us do that. I'm so tired, but I just have to push through. Yes, sometimes that's absolutely necessary. But sometimes the exhaustion is a signal our body is trying to tell us you need a break, right? And when you start to listen to your body, it starts to cooperate with you a little bit more. Okay. One thing that I heard a long time ago that changed the way I perceive myself. Is I don't think I have a body. I think I am a body. Okay? If I am a body, that gives me permission to prioritize the well-being of that body. Because if it's just something I have, I could choose to interact with it if I want to or not, right? But if it's something I am, I have to prioritize that, right? I have to maintain that. Okay? Another quote that may be helpful to you. We are not thinking creatures who feel. We are feeling creatures who think. Okay? So how do you feel internally about something? How does your body feel? That's where we start. Not what do I think? How do I feel? Okay? Little shifts like that in the way we perceive ourselves can go a long way in how we maintain ourselves without guilt. Okay? So what are the key takeaways here? Decision fatigue is real and it accumulates. Okay? The longer we stay fatigued, the more fatigued we're going to be, right? Cognitive load explains caregiver exhaustion better than motivation. Okay. So what does that mean? If you are exhausted, doesn't mean you lack motivation. Okay. It's because you are overwhelmed. You're carrying too much. Okay. Because if it's just a matter of motivation, then we can allow shame to kind of settle in there, right? I'm just not motivated enough. I'm procrastinating. I'm lazy. No, you're exhausted. Okay. Totally different sides of the spectrum there. If you're struggling, that doesn't mean you're failing. Okay. And reducing mental load matters more than trying harder. Okay. Again, there are times where you absolutely have to push through. Okay. I'm not saying that that's never going to happen. Okay. But it doesn't have to be every time. Okay. And if you prioritize cognitive rest, the situations that come up where you feel like you have to push through are going to be reduced because you're not going to be starting from depletion. Okay. You're going to be starting with a full tank. And so the pushing through is not necessarily something you end up with. It's just kind of, I'm following through, right? And I have the energy to sustain that. So if your brain feels tired, foggy, or full, that does not mean that you're a broken person. It means you've been carrying a lot. You've been carrying a lot thoughtfully, attentively for a very, very long time. Details matter when you're a caregiver, right? And this deserves understanding, not self-judgment. Okay? All right, so that's my info. I told you to be short and sweet today. If you want to reach out to me for resources, mental health support, you know, anything that you think that I might be able to help you with, this is my office number. I'm here Monday through Friday, except Wednesdays. I take those days off. And I'm here till about 4 o'clock, okay? That's my email address if you need to reach out to me. And of course, our website, alabamarespite.org.